Hello, D&Ders, RPGers, Game Masters, Dungeon Masters, and Space Masters. We're talking about White Star, and I'm going to show you a little bit that I've kind of put together that can be used for doing ship flight, okay? If you're like this far into my series, you pretty much know you go to drduick.com, hit the icosahedron, and click on the little space guy or robot, and then you can get into my science fiction RPG page. I'll put the link down in the description. But this is really kind of a simple way of kind of looking at the ship stats. The book has them in there, and I took what was in the companion as well as the core book and put them up on, and this is just a web page with graphic links. So if I click on the name, I see the stats. This is a blockade runner. Here's the armor class, the hit points, the shield strength, movement, all this stuff. And if you go back one, if you click on the ship, it gives you a picture of probably what a ship like that would look like. Now, I found all these images online, so I just put them in there. I kind of like them. If you need a map for your players, you can put this up. So it's a nice way of kind of like playing, and you say, well, what kind of ship is it? You scan the ship, and it looks like, oops, sorry. You scan the ship, and you look like it looks like a gunship. They go, well, what's it look like? I said, well, you're going to scan it. They scan it, and then you start giving them some more data. And I said, well, this is what the image is. This is what it looks like. It's got guns in the front, and you get a floor plan, and you can have a lot of fun with this. I use this in my groups because it makes it kind of easy and quick to put stuff up. Just kind of FYI, right? So, like I said, I have them all up here from those two books. Just to go back to this whole thing, I have and multiple pictures for some of them. And all the way down to these guys, which are actually vehicles, like this is a hover tank. There's a picture of what one. I found a cool image. I put it up, right? And then it has all the stats for each one of them. So once again, stats are on the names and images on this side. So if you ever wanted to go in there and use this, be my guest. Have fun with that, okay? So looking over this way, I'm going to get into this. We're going to go into space flight. Now, this developed out of the fact that it is actually in the book. There's some things on space flight, but it really comes down to the actual pilot doing most of the work for different things. I tried to incorporate a way that you can get almost an entire party of 5 people involved. You can actually see it when I get into ship crew and battle, how that all works out. But right now I'm just going to do space flight. In my space flight scenario, I had my sons were playing and they wanted to do something, escape from a planet's surface, going back and forth. And it kind of emerged out of gameplay what kind of worked. All right. So I'm going to go through this. It's not at all what's in the book, actually. It's just something I came up with, and it may be something you might want to try with your group, but it's printed, it's put up here so you can use it, right? So if you come down here to space flight, you get this page that looks like this, all right? Now, I do my stats a little differently. If you're between 17 and 18, you get a +2 on your rolls. 13 to 16 is +1, 9 to 12 is 0, 5 to 8 is -1, 3 to 4 is -2. So keep in mind that my stats are a little different than what it says to actually do in the book itself. The book just has at the most a +1 and the least a -1. I go a little further in the range because, it just works out better for us, right? And the 2 skills that are heavily used in spaceflight are navigation and technology. Navigation, if you're flying, technology is if you're trying to get the rest of the stuff to work, right? So let's take a look. So a pilot, and this gives you an idea of who all is involved in this. They would use their dexterity bonus and navigation skill to either jump to hyperspace or be involved in stealth flying if they had to get away from like an enemy, right? If you want to try to sneak out and get away from things, you would use stealth flying, right? For communication, which would be another person on the ship, you'd use your intelligence bonus and technology skill, scan planets, enemies, and anything else, or jam signals, which is kind of interesting. Suppose another enemy ship's trying to scan your ship or trying to locate you. I want to jam their signal, and how successful you're going to be, you would use a skill check for that. That's kind of how that would work. As far as engineering is concerned, you can boost power to engines, which would double your travel distance for the same amount of gas, I guess you might say. And you can also reduce your energy signatures, 2 different things that can be done. And basically the enemy tries to scan your ship, they get a -2 on the roll. So it's a way of actually messing with these different techniques to see how things work, right? So here's a pilot. If he wants to jump to hyperspace, he's going to have his dex bonus and navigation. Let's say he's a 18 dexterity and he has a navigation of +2. So just having to roll above a 10 would just require a 6 because you got +4 in the roll. That's all it takes for a charted course in normal flight. A very low, no stress situation. Sometimes I don't even make him do the check, but they say they want to roll. Everyone likes to roll. So I say, okay, you got to roll greater than a 10. Well, that should be easy, right? If they fail it, once again, you're into the medium check phase, right? But you also have some other things going on. For example, if you're going on an uncharted course, like you don't know where you're going, if there's greater than 50% damage to your ship, or right, or it's less, I guess less than 50%, maybe that's what I'm trying to say. I kind of put that wrong, I think. Now think about it. It was or someone's hurt in the crew. You're under some kind of pressure. So now the check's gonna be a little more difficult, right? Hard means that you have about 75% damage to your ship, okay? And half your team is incapacitated. You have to jump or escape an explosion, or you're being chased or fired on by an enemy. That's a really hard check. And the last one is if it's nearly impossible, right, to get out of there, right? So you're like a really bad situation. You have about 90% damage to your ship, all right? That's an example. You have 3 ships firing upon you. So I say, I get it, say greater than 90% damage. So the ship's almost blown up and you're trying to get out of there. And you're the only conscious team member and everybody else is knocked out. So that's an extra level of pain that you're actually having to go under and mental anguish to get out of there. Then it's a nearly impossible check. You have to roll greater or equal to a 25. Now this right here, what happens if you fail it? Great question, because you're always asking, okay, I made it, but what happens if I don't? This is taken from Stars Without Number. I'm not going to say it's a blatant thing. I like it because they use something called a spike drill. And it gives a mishap and tells you what happens. You just roll 3d6 with no modifier. What happened? It's pretty easy, right? What's fun about this is that it kind of takes a little bit of the, I don't have to kind of make something up. I just have to read something, right? So then you have something that comes up and you just say what happens. And obviously 9 to 12, you're just kind of off course, right? Then you make another pilot check, right? So this kind of gets easy to kind of determine what's going to happen. This is what we are using. You can use whatever you like. So now, let's take a look at this swing. If you want to stealthily fly, and the guy that's trying to scan you is a small ship, a space shuttle, a stun fighter, scout ships, orbital shuttles, light or medium or heavy transport star cruisers, you just got to beat a 10, right? If you fail that and you try to scan again, then it's harder. It's going to be a 15. But these are also bigger ships have better scanners. That's my theory in this thing, right? So military gunships, blockade runners, assault ships, and dreadnoughts got to beat a 15. Those are bigger ships, better scanners, right? Really hard ones, if you're trying to scan or avoid the scan of a military base or an orbital battle station, or if you've already been discovered. So if one of these ships are already discovered, and you said, well, I'm going to try to stealthily fly even though I've been discovered, then you have to build a 20 on your next roll. So you could still try it. It just makes it really kind of difficult. So if, say you fail twice and now you've been detected and later down the line, I'm going to try to go invisible. Well, it's going to be really, really hard, right? And the last one's nearly impossible, the game master. I got to decide if that's even worth it. Most people won't be able to qualify because the biggest bonuses you'll get on this stuff is pretty much a 4. So just kind of let you know it's there, but it's never really going to be used. So here's something. The comms, which would be another seat on the ship, not the pilot, but somebody else. And they're going to be able to make scans to determine certain things, like a type of ship, the type of the outpost, the number of occupants that are out there on the ground or in the ship itself. That should be real easy, just greater than or equal to 10, right? If you fail that check, you can see how it just kind of goes up. I don't have to mention it anymore. You see what happens. Every time you fail one, you got to go up to the next notch to try it again. But a medium check, if you wanted to find out what kind of weapons, what's the energy level of the ship, how much gas they have, you know what I'm saying? Location of the crew and the colony members, finding an object with the energy signature. That would be a greater than 15, how would you say, scan check. Last one's hard, or actually second from last one's hard if you're trying to find a certain individual on the ship or on the ground, or finding an object with no energy signal. So now you're going to try to really, really scan to find something that's, what will make that one person different? You have to come up with something identifiable. I guess from a game master point of view or space master, you would hear them kind of say, well, I'm looking for a certain amulet the thing was wearing, that, or the Star Knight that we're looking for, his lightsaber or Star Sword looked like this, and I'm going to scan for that energy. And there's ways you can get around it in gameplay. The last one is really, really hard to do something, finding something that's being jammed by another enemy that they're trying to prevent you from scanning, right? So they're blocking you. This is one of your options. The second option is to jam. Now the jam is like you're trying to keep them from sending signal to you. So there's two different things. Like obviously looking back at this, once again, this one you're trying to scan the ship. This one you're trying to prevent someone from scanning you. So these are your two options as a comms person. If it's a small ship, you can see it's easier to block than a gunship or a blockade runner or assault ships and stuff. The battle stations, they have bigger text, so it gets even harder to block or to jam being scanned. This is a fun way of playing this game. So something to keep in mind, right? Now, looking at this one, engineering, they got their things going on too. So if you're going to go normal flight, normal coast, no fuel capacity, this is full fuel. It's an easy engineering, shouldn't even have a problem. Most of the time, takeoff, landing, stuff like that, you don't worry. But if you want to throw a check in there, this would be something fairly simple. They can't really, you know, well, what's our fuel consumption? What's this going on? I mean, this is something that you could use if you wanted to, right? Now, following with this thing, medium is if you have damaged the ship, somebody's hurt, things are going on, and you're trying to give an energy boost. Now, what you're saying is energy boost means you're trying to double your flight distance, you know, increase your speed, get out of there. You have to make these checks. So this is some, okay, we're trying to evade the enemy. We're going to boost this whole thing. This is a way of doing it. These things mimic pretty much what the other one says, except it has a thing called fuel reserves. So if your fuel reserves are 75% or so, you could do this check. 50%, because then you're going to just trying to dump lots of juice into the engines. And the last one is, you know, basically you have a problem with the ship and you're still trying to get out of there and boost energy. So something to consider, right? To reduce a signature, and this subtracts from the enemy scans, right? It goes through its own difficulty checks as well, right? And it kind of follows the last thing, except, you know, once again, if you're being distracted or you're being chased by an enemy, they kind of know you're there. Therefore, it gets harder and harder, right? If you're being chased and fired upon, that means they've actually targeted you. The last thing is, this is when you actually, the game master just decides what he likes, right? Now I'm going to talk a little bit about faster and light versus impulse drive. I discern these two, and I do this intentionally because of I ended up in grid battles with hex grids. So when would you use one as opposed to the other? So I call it FTL reserves, and I call it impulse reserves. So one FTL, faster and light reserve, is equal to 100 impulse reserves, right? It's much more efficient to travel far distance using the FTL drive, faster and light drive. It takes less time, right? 100th time, essentially, is what it is, right? I have to travel 1 parsec, which is a sector, hex, like 4.2 light years. With the FTL drive, it takes only 1 minute and uses 1 FTL reserve. Really simple, right? To travel a parsec using the impulse drive takes 100 times longer. It uses the same amount of energy, it just takes longer because of the type of drive you're using. It's a very, very fundamental way of looking at this. It works for me. You cannot track and scan when using an FTL drive. So if you're trying to scan your surroundings, scan ahead of time to see if anybody's there, it's not going to work to arrive there. That's the problem. Biggest problem with using FTL drive is that you might just show up and everybody's around you. You know, whoops, I came out of faster and light drive and I have like 3 dreadnoughts sitting around on top of me. So that's something to consider, right? Also, looking at this, it's a tank where FTL reserves can be converted to 100 impulse drives, but you cannot convert backwards. You can't take the juice from impulse reserves and put it back into FTL. So you can only go down. It's a one-way stream with that guy, right? So let's take a look. Impulse hex maps are used for starship battles, planet battles, and nebula battles. So I have the 2 tokens, and I'll show you what these look. I got maps for these things, and I'll go into great detail about spaceship battle. I came up with a really cool way. It's kind of like battleship with a group of people, right? And I have this thing set up, if you're going to be flying next to planets or between 2 close planets, right? Something in its moon, a planet's moon, orbital space stations, Claxon Rift, that's one of the things I'm using. We're going to be using impulse hexes, which are these, okay? When you get to the actual bigger ones, this is going to be, now these aren't impulse hexes anymore. Now we're into sector hexes, right? So I call them SHs. So they have different designations, SH and IH. So one of these hexes right here is 100 impulse hexes. Okay, so it's a different scale, right? So one impulse hex is 1 minute traveling impulse drive. So the ship is 100 impulse hexes. This is just some simple math, right? Trying to get to Telenian and to Undala. That's 100 impulse hexes between these two. And it would take 1 hour and 40 minutes, 100 minutes total, which is 1 hour and 40 minutes to go from here to here, okay? If I want to try to go with Starry 6 or 7, I'm sorry, Starry 7, I got to go 1, 2, I guess it's 1, 2, 3, 3 away. I count the one you're in. Or we just count you center. 1, 2, 3. So that would be essentially, no, I'm not counting. I'm counting 2. 1, 2. Sorry, I said that backwards. 2 in, that's actually 200 impulse hexes, right? But it would take you quite a while to get there, 3 hours and 20 minutes to get there. Except if you wanted to use your fastener light drive, it'd only take you 1 to 2 minutes to get there. This may be important if you're trying to run somewhere, right? And we'll look at another one of these things. Here is the asteroid field MK21. You can see it's 1, 2, 3 hexes away. It would take you 300 minutes or basically 5 hours to get that far. Okay, this is what we're using in our campaign. It seems to work, right? So if you look at this again, sector hexes is much faster travel. So if here I was trying to get to either Andala or if I want to get to Talina, it's only 1 minute away if I use my fastener light drive. Boom, 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 I'm there. So why does it take a minute if you're fastener light? Well, it's the start up and the start down because you got to dampen it on out. It takes a whole minute for that whole thing to take place, right? And it'd be 2 minutes just to get to Bastiri 7, and it takes 3, 1, 2, 3 to get down to the asteroid field. Now keep in mind, you may want to go slower because you could be evading an enemy at the time. If you just jump from here to here, chances are, you know, you show up and all of a sudden you're with a bunch of other galactic consortium ships. And it's just something you got to think about, right? So here we go. I try to give an idea of who's short, long distance, and medium distance runners for these things, and tell you the impulse drive reserve size. That means how much fuel can hold. They all standardly hold 100, so they convert this one to 100. So they get one. Let's just work on the short real quick. You get 1 FTL drive reserve, and you get 100 impulse drive. So like an orbital shuttle just goes back and forth from a planet to like an orbital station, right? So it's going to go back and forth, and it has one more FTL drive. If you think about it, it's kind of like folding space and time and energy that can be opened up and stuck in the impulse drive, and it takes up much more space. It's kind of a weird way of thinking about this. So that's kind of interesting. Space shots aren't really going to go past the planet much. Stun fighters, these are all going to be like in a close proximity movement. Something that goes a little further, right? You think about this guy. These are blockade runners, gunships, light cruiser, star cruisers, things like this. These guys are going to have 6 FLT reserves. So they're able to take one of those units and convert it to an impulse drive when they get closer. And obviously, if you think about it, it kind of makes sense, right? So this got bigger engines, and they also have a bigger fuel reserve for doing things. These are all standard size. You wouldn't have more than that because you would always convert an FTL drive reserve into one of those guys. And the longest ones are scout ships and drought nets and heavy transports. Those are the ones that have a ton of fuel. Essentially, you can dock up to a heavy transport and siphon energy off it if you did it correctly, had the right stuff. So looking at this is a nice way of kind of looking at the numbers behind it. So a parsec, right, is 4.2 light years. Okay, that's what it is, standard physics, right? It takes 1 FLT reserve to move that far, right? And 1 impulse drive will actually move 0.01 of a parsec. That's how that thing's labeled, right? So how many sector movements would you make? You can make 1 sector movement with 1 FLT reserve, right? Or 0.01 sector movements with 1 impulse drive reserve. So how long does it take to get there? If you're using FLT reserve, it takes 1 minute. However, if you're going to use your impulse drive to get there, it would take 1 hour and 40 minutes or 100 minutes to get there. So this is how I did spaceflight. Now, if you go back and if it makes sense to you and you kind of like it, be my guest in using any of this stuff. Like I said, I don't make money or anything off of this vice versa. I just like playing it, and I like to share my ideas with people. So if you go ahead and you have some fun with this thing, like I said, it'd be interesting to take your take on it. And if you come up with a better idea, share it. I would love to see what you come up with, because this is an amazingly fun game. And I've never done space travel. And I know that Stars Without Number had something that was sort of confusing for me or something like that. I try to make it so simple that I could teach it. If I could teach it and then people understand it, then I'm golden. That's how I look at it. And so if it's so confusing that nobody gets it the first time I explain it, or I have to explain it like 10 times as opposed to 2 times. Sometimes you have to go through it twice and show how it would work, and then everyone understands it. And you got to track it as a game master more than them, or you put like the engineering guy in charge of tracking the fuel. Um, you want to make sure the game flows in such a way that it's fun and not overly burdensome as trying to understand what's going on. With that, I thank you for your time, and you have a fantastic day. Cool.